Unequal ratio breathing. Vishama Vittri Pranyama. Vishama Vittri Pranyama means unequal breathing, and it refers to any breathing pattern in which there is a variation between the lengths of the parts of the breath. The effects generated from Vishama Vittri can vary considerably because changing the ratio of the inhalation to the exhalation, or adding a longer or shorter retention, alters the physiological effects. Generally, the exhalation is twice the inhalation, as seen in the ratio 1 to 2, meaning that if the inhalation is 4 seconds, then the exhalation is 8. If we add the antara kumbhaka, inner retention, the typical retention is 4 times the inhalation and the exhalation remains double the inhalation, as in the ratio 1, 4, 2. For example, if the inhalation is 4 seconds, the inner retention is 16 seconds and the exhalation is 8 seconds. The full Vishama Vittri practice also includes the baya kumbhaka, outer retention, which is equal to the length of the inhalation as we see it as a ratio of 1 to 4 to 2 to 1. So if the inhalation is 4 seconds, the inner retention is 16 seconds, the exhalation is 8, and the outer retention is 4. These are the 3 breath ratios that are the most common in traditional pranayama for Vishama Vittri, with 1 to 2 being the easiest and 1 to 4 to 2 to 1 being the most difficult. I left out one variation. This is where we skip the antara kumbhaka and focus on the baya kumbhaka. This ratio is expressed as 1 to 2 to 1, where the inhalation is 1, the exhalation is 2, and the outer retention is 1. This variation is rarely practiced, but working with breathing patterns that focus on lengthening the exhalation has a lot of value, as we will explore later. When we practice using these ratios, adding even 1 second to the inhalation can increase the level of difficulty exponentially. For example, if the inhalation is 6 seconds, or 6 to 24 to 12 to 6, then the breath cycle is 48 seconds long. If we increase the inhalation to 7 seconds, the breath cycle is 56 seconds long. Adding only 4 seconds to the inhalation and increasing it to 10 seconds, 10 to 40 to 20 to 10, makes the breath cycle 1 minute 20 seconds long, almost double the ratio based on 6 seconds. As with all pranayama practices, the longer we maintain the practice, the greater the effects. This is especially true with Vishama Vittri because ultimately it is a kumbhaka, a retention practice. When practicing Vishama Vittri and trying to find the ratio that works for you, aim to be able to maintain the breath for at least 10 minutes before adding a second ratio. Different approaches to Vishama Vittri give us different physiological and emotional effects based on our intention. If we adhere to the 1 to 4 to 2 to 1 ratio and practice it that way, it is easy to maintain. We will feel calm, relaxed, and meditative. If we increase the length of each breath cycle to the point that it is extremely challenging but still maintainable, the feeling of breath hunger will increase quickly and require us to control the response from the sympathetic nervous system mentally. This kind of training has great value in managing anxiety and panic, but can also put us into a state of anxiety and panic. Based on our ability to handle the breath practice, we can see a sympathetic response that would come from panicking, or we might have the opposite response with an increase in parasympathetic tone that comes from the increased CO2 levels and our ability to remain calm even when resisting the strong urge to breathe. The ratio of 1 to 4 to 2 to 1 is great for practicing sustained kumbhaka. As I have said, being able to hold a single breath for a long time is great, but we see the most benefits from practicing breath retention over a long period. This specific ratio allows us to prolong the parts of the breath that are easiest to lengthen and shortens the parts that are more difficult to extend. The relationship of respiration to retention is only 3 to 5, 1 for inhalation plus 2 for exhalation, and 4 for inner retention plus 1 for outer retention. Because the time we spend inhaling and exhaling is more than half the time we are holding the breath, we can maintain the practice longer, giving us time to recover quickly from the breath holds while still enabling us to breathe less. Sustaining this extended breath cycle over longer periods builds up CO2, increasing cellular respiration and oxygenation of the cells, lowering blood pressure, and slowing the heart. After several rounds of continuous Vishama Vittri, the spleen contracts and releases more red blood cells into the bloodstream, boosting the amount of oxygen-carrying hemoglobin. Prolonged unequal ratio breathing practices also result in the body producing more red blood cells, which improves VO2 max and athletic performance. The effects of the practice increase when the breath values are higher. A ratio of 3 to 12 to 6 to 3 might not create enough of a demand for the spleen to release more red blood cells, especially if the breath practice feels easy. But if we start increasing those values to something more challenging, like 7 to 28 to 14 to 7, and start to experience a little breath hunger, then the physiological effects from the practice are much more noticeable. Of course, building up to this point takes time, and the ratio we choose shouldn't be based on achieving the highest possible numbers, though higher ratio and longer holds do come with added health and athletic benefits. Instead, we should aim to find a ratio that is challenging yet sustainable. Practicing longer breath cycles for longer durations builds our tolerance to CO2, allowing us to retain the breath for longer before feeling breath hunger. Vishama Vittri, when practiced within our capabilities, stimulates more parasympathetic tone and tamasic energy, bringing us into a relaxed, more meditative state. This pranayama practice is great for recovering from exercise and exertion, boosting the immune system, or recovering from an illness, although if it's a respiratory infection, doing the long holds can be challenging. However, adhering only to this standard ratio dramatically limits our use of the breath. With Vishama Vittri, we can change the length values to whatever serves our purpose. Much of what I have talked about already has to do with how the inhalation and exhalation relate to the effect on our autonomic nervous system and energetic body, and how breath retention has a physiological influence on our bodies. If we apply our knowledge of how the different components of the breath affect us, then we can adjust the ratio to guide our intention of whatever practice we are doing. We see this in techniques like 4 to 7 to 8 breathing, which doctors and therapists use to help calm and relax patients experiencing high levels of stress and anxiety. The inhalation is 4 seconds, the inner retention is 7, and the exhalation is 8. Whenever the exhalation is double the inhalation, the technique is going to stimulate the sympathetic nervous system and create more tamasic energy. Adding a short retention slows the breath even more and allows for a slight increase of CO2 without the practitioner feeling any added stress or breath hunger from the hold that they might experience with a longer retention. The shorter retention is especially helpful if the person is not used to holding their breath and is already suffering from anxiety. If we wanted to focus on working on our Baya Kumbhaka, we could use a ratio of 1 to 2 to 2 to 4. To increase rajas and sympathetic tone to have more energy, we could practice a breath ratio of 4 to 1, where the inhalation is 4 times as long as the exhalation. There are so many ways to use the breath just by changing the ratio of these 4 components. I will give more examples as we move into the breath sequences in the next section. However, just use your knowledge of how the breath affects the various systems of the body, and this will give you the tools to modify Vishama Vittri to fit your purpose.